All right, so this is an outline of what I plan to talk about today. We'll review research data management definitions briefly. If you were with us last week, it will be a bit of a review, so just bear with us. I'll then go into some specific resources for data management activities, including around organization, documentation, storage, and data sharing. I'll then review some resources that cover research data management more holistically, and then I'll include resources and tools specific to data management planning, and finish with a demonstration of DMPTool. So we'll review what we mean when we say research data management and why it's important to our work. So ODU maintains a research and scholarly digital data management policy. According to this policy, research data is digitally recorded information necessary to support or validate a research project's observations, findings, or outputs. And put another way, what are the input or output of your research without which you couldn't have drawn your conclusions? Oops. Go back. So research data, depending on your discipline, what's considered data can and likely will be different. So it's all going to depend on the context of your research. Any of these might be considered data, including spreadsheets, surveys, audio, video, models and simulation, and archival material and historic documents. I think it's important to note before I get into the definition here that not everything related to your research project would be considered data under certain definitions. The NIH, for example, indicates that products such as lab notebooks and physical objects are not included in their definition of data. So if you do have specific requirements that you are following, just be aware that some things may be included or excluded depending on that. So research data management is a term that's used to describe the processes that either researchers and or institutions use for organizing, securing, archiving, and sharing research data. And it's important to note that the data management practices cover all of the life cycle around your data. This list provided by Princeton University as to why it's important to manage our data is pretty comprehensive, and we can see a lot of benefits to data management. So if our data is managed well, we'll be able to find our data, ensure better project continuity if there's researcher or staff changes, can save us time and reduce the risk of lost, redundant, and reworked data. It can hopefully enhance collaboration and impact, and we'll also be able to comply with funder and or journal requirements. So some specific activities that fall within research data management include data organization, data documentation, data storage, and data sharing and preservation. But sometimes it's hard to know where to start with some of these topics. So this presentation really aims to point you to some more concrete tools and resources that you can refer to when you're considering the management of your own data. So I'll start with organization. And as stated by the Ohio State University, that's knowing what data you have and where it is. So this includes establishing a file directory structure and a file naming convention before you start collecting your data and ensuring that this is properly documented. So this will save you time when storing and locating data during your project. You'll also want to think about how your data would be best organized, whether by date or experiment or some other method. So if you're looking for some guidance on file naming and organization, these checklists might be helpful. Let me see if I can pull it over. So this goes, there we go. So file names should be descriptive and provide context. Best practices include using a standard date format, leaving zeros, and a versioning system. So you can kind of go through and see if these apply to your files and how it will be best to do that. And then this is similar, but it is for organization of files. It doesn't want to pull up right now. Let me see. But overall, they should be consistent. create different folders for project stages, determine your file organization. You can use READMEs in your files to describe what's actually in there. So this just gives an example directory structure of how you might organize your data. But you might want to think about, is it going to be chronological, by classification or code, alphabetically, depending if that's useful or not to you. The next thing I want to review is documentation. It's often called metadata.
Nikki,
oh, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
There is a question in the chat.
Oh, sure. Yes. Can you read that to me?
Someone wants to know, how do researchers know these best practice rules exist?
That's kind of why we're doing this presentation right now, because the best practices are I don't want to say they're scattered, but they are not always in all the same places as far as where all these best practices exist. Some of them may be more discipline specific, as far as how you should name your files, or project specific of how you're going to organize your files. So it may be just what was done, prior to you, and you continue that. If it's the same project that goes on for years, you want to keep that same structure. So it may be a little bit disciplinary, but for researchers who are just starting out, who don't really maybe know some of these best practices, that's why I'm trying to get these out there. So that's not a great answer, but that's kind of why we're doing this, just to have some best practices around your data. So documentation, often called metadata, this is super important throughout all aspects of the research lifecycle, not just for data. So it describes the who, what, where, when, and why of your data and your research project overall. So this will help both you and others understand what you did, how you did it, why you did it. For you as a researcher, in case you need to come back to this research, that's a really good trail of what you did and why you did it. And it's going to help those who want to reuse it know the context around your data. So it should contain the minimum information required to be able to reuse the data that's being described. There can be different types of documentation. There can be README files, data dictionaries, code books. If you're writing scripts and code and software itself, you could have inline commenting so that other people know what it's about at that specific point in the code. So a README file is generally just a plain text document that has information that users hopefully and should read prior to using a data set. It can include project information, such as the list of files, your naming conventions, directory structures, the creators, your methodology, etc. And there's this checklist from Harvard that does a good job of explaining some things around README files, but it kind of goes a little bit beyond. So who's going to write the README files? What information is required? Are you going to update and review them? Where are these README files going to be placed? So they could be at top level directories. They could be within certain file folders. Why does your audience need the README? And then how will you make them? So if you want to use a template, for example, Cornell Data Services has a downloadable template that you can use to adapt to your own needs.
Hey, Nikki, there's a comment.
Yes.
Yeah, it says you can also look at journals in which you want to submit your study publication. Some have best practice guidelines for data management.
Yes, that is true. And they'll also have guidelines around how they would like you to share your data, and also how they would like you to describe that in your article as well. So yes, very good points. So this is a downloadable template that you can adapt to your own data. So it will download, it'll bring you to another, their repository, and you can download it. And it's just a plain text format. It has things like the creators in there. It has your methodology, your files, how those files are connected to each other. And you don't necessarily need to use everything in the README. You can pull out what might be important for your files and your folders. That's the MD. So this is just a text file. So sharing and access information, if there's any restrictions to your data, it has all the authors, principal investigators, dates of data collection, locations. So it's just a good outline of things that you may want to include in a README file, but not necessarily everything will apply to your specific use case. Another form of documentation is a data dictionary. So it's commonly used with tabular data to describe variable names and values. I like this page by OSF. It has also examples that you can go and see. And then this MUPED data dictionary is also another blank template that you can use to update. And so you can just download it as a CSV or a spreadsheet, and then go ahead and use that for your own work as it makes sense to do so. Codebooks also describe the variables and the structure and the content and the layout of your data set. Sometimes it is used interchangeably with data dictionary, but it is used more for survey data. And ICPSR has a lot of information on what a codebook is and how to read a codebook and things like that. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Okay. So for storage, like documentation, it's really important and should be thought of at the beginning of the project as to what options for storage will best fit your data. So are there any privacy concerns or sensitive information that need a higher level of access control during the collection analysis phases? Your active storage, you're actively working with your files, and you might need to think about versions, backups, and roles and responsibilities about who's putting what where. So ODU has multiple data storage options. So there's some servers, cloud-based services, but not all options will be appropriate for all data types. They've developed a research storage matrix that may help you choose appropriate technology tools for storing your research data. I will show it to you. I won't spend too much time on it because it's also best practice to contact the Office of Research Compliance or ITS to discuss your specific research project if you should have questions about where it should be stored. But I did want to make you aware that this resource exists as a reference and might be a good starting point for thinking about where you should store your data. So it has data types, and then it has the possible storage options down here and what may and may not be allowed to be stored there. So I just want to make you aware that it's fairly new, but it does exist and might be a good starting point for data storage during that active collecting and analysis phase of your research. Okay, so a key aspect of data sharing and preservation generally, but not always happens at the end of a project once your data are in a final or a version of a final state. So some things to think about are: where's the best place to deposit my data? Are there restrictions as to who should have access based on maybe those privacy or confidentiality concerns? Is the accompanying documentation, metadata complete and accurate and up to date? So one aspect of data sharing is making the data associated with your research project articles publicly accessible. So it's best practice to use what's called a data repository to deposit your data. And that's a centralized place that holds data, shares the data publicly, and also organizes that data in a logical manner. So using an established repository is going to ensure that your data are deposited within an infrastructure that's going to preserve your data for the long term. It's going to make it accessible, discoverable, and also easily citable so others can cite your work. But there are so many repositories out there that it can be hard to determine which one might be best for your data. So The easiest is if a grant is going to specify what repository they would like you to use. This does happen, and if that is specified, you should use that repository. If no repository is specified, then you have a couple options. So the research community with which you interact may have repositories that are appropriate for the type of data you collect, and it would be best to use those because then everyone in your discipline kind of knows where to go to look for data. If there is no discipline-specific repository, then you can use a generalist repository. And these repositories accept data regardless of data type, format, content, or disciplinary focus. So that's kind of a type of repository. And once you know what type would be best for your data, there's a couple of resources that might then help you narrow down the specific repository that would be a good fit for your data. So this is, I'll open in just a minute, is a generalist repository comparison chart. It shows each of 7 repositories side by side with information about cost, file size limits, licensing options. These repositories are part of the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, and they provide this information so that the researcher can make a more informed decision of where might be a best place to store their data. Hopefully it'll load for me. I'll let that one load. The other ones I have listed here are a little bit more, oh, there we go, perfect. The other ones listed are a little bit more NIH specific, and I will open that data repository finder in a minute as well. But I just wanted to show you the repository chart. Hopefully I can zoom in a little bit. So the 7 repositories that are part of that initiative are Harvard Dataverse, Dryad, Figshare, Mendeley, Open Science Framework, Vivly, and Zenodo. So they're really they like to call it a co-opetition. So they're trying to make things a little bit more streamlined, like what metadata they might expect from the researchers, but each of them might have differences in what size files they may accept. Or Vivly, for instance, is more, they focus on clinical trial data. So they might have a different focus slightly, but they are trying to work together in some of those broader data management things. So there's costs, size limits, licensing options, access preservation. So as you're, if you need to look at repository, then this is a good place to just see which ones might be, might fit the needs of your research a little bit better. As I said, these next 3 are more for NIH supported research. So the National Library of Medicine has a repository finder. It's going to ask the researcher to answer a couple questions in order to narrow down the number of repositories to compare. So it's going to ask you to describe your data, any type, data uploads are free. Do you need to embargo your data? So is there a certain amount of time that you don't want your data to be made public? Do you need a certain format or type? And as you're narrowing it down, things will get grayed out and you'll see the ones that might be a fit for your data. And I have listed a couple other repository lists just for reference, but I do caution that they can be a little bit overwhelming. They list a lot of repositories, but they do include some repositories that might be more appropriate in other disciplines, such as the qualitative data repository, for instance. If you've been managing your data well throughout your research project, hopefully preparing your data for submission won't be a super heavy lift. But I do like this checklist from that gray group that we just talked about briefly. It reminds researchers to review your repository guidelines, choose open file formats, eliminate things in your data submission that might not be relevant or useful in the long term, confirming that your data actually can be shared. So if there's de-identification concerns, species concerns, so the ultimate goal is to make your data as fair as possible, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But as we just talked about a little bit too, as open as necessary, or as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. So there will be times that you may want those access controls. And that's something to look at with the repositories that you may be choosing. So data curation can be thought of as the organization, compilation, and integration of your research data for sharing and reusing and archiving. It does cover a lot of aspects of data management that you may have been doing throughout your project. And it can also be part of preparing your data for submission. So some repositories will help you with these activities. So it could be the reorganization of files, validating code, converting your files either into a digital format or from one format to another. Again, quality assurance and de-identification. Resources for data curation include the Data Curation Network. They have a curated workflow, which are standardized steps that the data curators within this network follow when they're reviewing data for submission into a repository. There's also, I will pull up these data curation primers. They are peer-reviewed living documents. They detail a specific subject or disciplinary area or curation task, and they can be used as a reference point. And as I mentioned, some repositories will help you with data curation. So if that's important to you, be sure to look at that when you are reviewing repositories for your data. I would say, especially if you're dealing with human subjects research or anything that might need to be de-identified, the Qualitative Data Repository and ICPSR do offer curation help. But just pulling up these data curation primers, if you have archaeology data, clinical trials data, this might be good to look at just to see, what repositories might be looking for as far as how your data is organized and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of them here, but they're pretty specific. Okay. So the resources that we've talked about so far have been fairly specific to a certain aspect of research data management, but there's some that do cover the life cycle and best practices a little more holistically. So I just have a couple of those here. This research data management workbook is a collection of exercises that's intended to help researchers improve their data management practices. So it covers a lot of what we've already talked about, file naming and organization, README files, storage and backup and repositories and things like that. This self-guided research data management workshop was developed by the University of Illinois, and it's a Prezi format, so it allows users to move through each of the topics in order or out of order, and you can click on topics of interest to you. It's good if you need just kind of like a refresher of a different part of the process. If you're anything like me, though, I gravitate towards checklists. And these from Stanford and Harvard are good starting points. This one from Stanford is a little bit more broad. Let's see if I have. So, every member of the research team is able to find and use the data, but it's not saying where is that data. So these are more high level. And we've reviewed all the policies from the university, things like that. So a checklist of kind of those more high level things associated with your data. The Harvard life cycle checklist, is a little bit more granular, I would say, as to specific tasks that may need to be. So explain good documentation, list the data types, files, formats, and sizes. So a little bit more specific as to your specific research project. And then a couple just help and how-tos. There are so many out there that it is hard to maybe decide which one will be best for you. But this one is the Guide to Social Science from ICPSR, the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology Data Management Resources. So that's a little bit more specific. And then the Research Data Management Toolkit for Life Sciences. So there are specific ones that are more disciplinary help and how-to guides as well. Okay. Do you have any questions before we move on to data management planning? Okay. So a research data management plan is a document that's going to describe the types of data that are going to be collected for a research project, how that data is going to be organized, maintained, and documented throughout the project lifecycle, as well as how that data might be shared. A lot of federal agencies do require some sort of a data management plan to be included with proposals for funding. But I would suggest that even if it's not required, it can be a good idea for your project. It can provide a record of what you intended to do, clarify who should or shouldn't have access to the data, identify any areas of weakness that you might need to address. So here I'm going to provide some guidance on data management planning, including templates, samples, tools, and then a brief demonstration of DMPTool. So again, I gravitate towards checklists. I really like that they're short, succinct, and to the point. So the qualitative data management plan checklist is listed here, as well as I think the second one is a little bit more NIH focused, a couple help and how-tos for writing a data management plan. However, if you are writing a proposal for federal funding, each agency provides their own guidance. So you do want to be sure to check for that individually if that pertains to you. Some agencies do have templates that you can download and work from. So NIH, certain NSF divisions, and USGS are just a couple examples that I found that you can actually download a template from. So if we go to the NIH data management and sharing plan format, there's just a Word document that you can download, and it'll have the sections and you can fill in what's required in those sections. Sometimes it's also helpful, I think, to look at sample plans, just to get an idea of what others have done, maybe in similar fields. So agencies, again, like the NIH, provide some samples, and so does the DMPTool, called their public plans, which I will show in a little bit. It should be noted that these sample plans should be used for guidance, and they aren't necessarily associated with any proposal that was accepted. But they might just give you an idea of what to include in a data management plan. So there are several tools for creating a data management plan. So the ones we just talked about is using funder guidance, using templates if available, or you can use a tool that was made to help you create a data management plan. The DMPTool provides templates specific to funders and guidance under each template. So if you're new to writing data management plans, I would suggest even going and looking at DMPTool to get an idea of what might be expected, especially if your funder doesn't have those specific templates or very explicit guidance on what to include. So DMPTool it's free. It's a click-through online wizard that, like I said, has funder-specific information and guidance. There's several other tools I want to mention. DMP Online and the Data Stewardship Wizard. These are based more on European policies, funders, and institutions. But if you do work internationally, they might be useful to you to look at as well. So for now, I'm going to focus on DMPTool, and hopefully it'll work. Give a brief demonstration here. Let me just get myself organized. Okay. So when you first go to a DMPTool, you'll see the public plans and funder requirements up at the top. So you don't need to sign up or log in to look at either of those. To create a plan, you would need to sign in. I have a login already, so we do have single sign-on. So if I just use my institutional address, it should recognize me. And I'm already logged in, but if you're not, it will make you go through Midas. So this is what the dashboard looks like. If you haven't ever been in here before, you probably won't have any projects in your dashboard. Up at the top again, you'll see the public plans and the funder requirements, and then the dashboard that'll always bring you back here. And then you can have this create plan button, which we will go into in a minute. This will take you to ODU's data management library research guide. And then this, if you needed help, that's my email. So if you wanted assistance with data management plans, you can get in touch with me as well. So under my dashboard, these are the plans that I've created, or that have been shared by other people. So you can share and collaborate on plans as needed. These plans are plans that other people at ODU have created and shared just within the organization. So they haven't been shared publicly, but if you were to log in, you would see these. So you can view them as samples or see what they have done. So just a couple here. Okay. At the bottom as well, you can, again, fund requirements, public plans, the help in case you get stuck on anything, it's pretty useful there. So if I go to just create a new plan, this is what it's going to look at. So you need to set up a little bit of information about your project. What research project are you planning? If it's a test project, like most of mine are at this point, you would just check that. Research organization. And then under funder, if I just begin typing, so I have NSF, I can click on that, and then I can see that they have a whole list of templates for each of their divisions. So if you were doing the biological sciences one, you may want to choose that. I'm not sure exactly how different these are between different divisions, but probably best practice to choose the one that is most applicable. If I do NIH, again, there will be a couple here. There's the default. They're doing a couple pilots, and then the Institute of Mental Health has their own template. So, all right, I'm going to go back to my dashboard. I won't create another one, but I'm just going to do a no funder one. So I didn't have a specific funder, but if we want to look at one, that is fine as well. So this is what it's going to look like when you create a plan. So you're going to have your project details, collaborators, actually writing the plan, research outputs, finalization, and then if you want to download. So the project title, abstract, research domain, start and end, just basic information about your project. Collaborators, if you wanted to have other contributors, you can add those just using email address. You can choose roles of each person. You can have them either be able to, so co-owner, they can view, they can comment, they can edit. Editor will have not quite admin rights, and then read only. They can go in, but they won't be able to edit it or anything like that. Under the right plan part is where you're going to see things split out into the specific sections that the agency or funder is requiring. So under data collection, it's going to ask you the specific questions. What data are you going to collect or create? And over on the guidance, it's going to just give you some more information. So what type, format, and volume of data are you expecting? How will the data be collected or created? So you would just fill in each of these documentation, if there's any specific documentation that you're going to need to, that's going to be required for anyone to reuse your data, ethics and legal compliance, how are you going to store your data, data sharing, how will you share the data, are there any restrictions, things like that. So you would just go through and write everything out in here. Another one that is becoming a little bit more common is this responsibilities as well. There, some agencies want to know, who is going to be responsible for the data management at your for your project. And then research outputs. You can it might be redundant to what you've already added in that data collection part of your plan, but you could list your anticipated outputs here if you wanted to. I can't finalize it yet because I haven't answered at least 50% of the questions. You can also register your plan for a DOI if you need to. You'll be able to then, I believe you can make revisions to it if you do that, but I can get back to you if anyone has questions on that. And then finally, you can choose your download settings and download it there. The only thing I have heard about that is most of the time there's a 2-page limit to DMPs, and sometimes it can be hard to tell where you are within that limit. I did see that some agencies, data, Department of Transportation, I saw some really long data management plans in their repository. So it might vary depending on the agency, but most do have a 2-page limit. My suggestion is to be as clear and concise as possible. But if you do go over that limit, I wouldn't get rid of that plan. I would keep it because it probably has all the information you need, but to see if there's some way that you can, it's overly redundant or things like that might be able to be modified. Does anyone have any questions or want to see a plan template other than just this generic one? Okay. I'll just click on public plans really quick. So you can go in and look at funders. So if I only wanted to see plans that are public that are from NSF, I could click on that. I could see what institution, maybe if I'm looking at that, and specific subjects if I'm interested in narrowing it down more. The funder requirements as well. So if you wanted to search for anything, but so they even have some foundations and things in here. So it's not all just federal agencies. So if you wanted to go in and look and see what your funder requirements actually were before you start your plan, those do not require you to log in. Okay, we'll go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so before we close, I just want to provide a couple of additional resources. So I didn't cover human subjects research in too much detail today, but I did want to point out a couple of resources that might be useful if it is the type of research that you conduct. There's some informed consent language, that there are some templates and recommended language that includes provisions for data sharing that you can use up front. There's some resources as well for de-identification. The National Library of Medicine has done a tool on some open tools for data de-identification. So if you're curious about those sorts of things, there's a couple areas to get you started. We did talk about this a little bit earlier, but ODU does have resources as well. So Technology Services has the data storage, but they also have research computing support, guidelines for sensitive and regulated data, and things like that. The Division of Research and Economic Development, they help with the grant and funding development, compliance, innovations and commercialization, sponsored programs, as well as the Office for Undergraduate Research. And then ODU also has a policy of training all graduate students in the responsible conduct of research. And that course has a data management module now. So if you need a refresher, that's a good one to look at as well. And lastly, ODU libraries are here for you. So we have librarians in subject areas that can meet with you online and in person to assist you. We do have research guides, including that one that's linked from DMPTool on data management. We have librarians skilled in other aspects of scholarly communication, including citation management, open access, OER, and publishing. So if you have questions, please reach out. So thank you for joining us today. I know it's a lot to take in, so hopefully you feel a little bit clearer or have an idea of where you might want to start if you had questions about any aspect of data management. So here's my contact information. You can always reach out to me if you have a question.